Acknowledge. Echo 1, confirm shell download.
Copy that. Ready when you are.
Echo 1, as a newly completed Series 11 Echo unit, your first deployment will be on the outer rings of Saturn, aboard the Kronos 2 mining station. With no need for oxygen or shielding from the cold, you'll be uniquely suited to operate in the station's zero-G environment. You'll also provide simulated companionship for the Kronos 2 captain, helping her withstand the harsh realities of prolonged isolation in space.
You are the only person who calls me Jack. To everyone else, I am merely Echo 1.
Is that your way of saying you're going to miss me?
I have no...
Anomaly detected. Proximity alert.
I have a visual on the anomaly. It seems to be growing more unstable.
My God! Incoming, Jack! Cut the panel! Jack! What the hell is this?
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Oculus Connect. I'm David Yee, I'm with Oculus Studios, and it's one of the joys of my job to get to work with great teams like Ready at Dawn that we have here today. Joining us today, we have Rue, President and CCO, Dana, who's the Game Director for Lone Echo and Echo Arena, Garret, who's the Technical Director, and Nate over there is the Art Director of all the fantastic stuff we've seen so far. Quick notes on format. We've got a lot of content that we wanted to pack in this. We could sit here for hours and talk. We don't have that much time. So although it's my favorite part of every panel, we're going to not do Q&A here, but immediately after the panel, we are all going to shift over into one of the open lounges in the show demo floor if you want to catch us over there and ask any questions or talk about things. So first, Rue. I want to talk a little bit about Ready at Dawn and why VR. What was compelling to you and what made you want to do this?
I think what was compelling to us, and I saw this in many developers out there, was the fact that we were, throughout our career, we were always kind of looking for the next thing to do. And sometimes it means making games and making sequels. Sometimes it means switching platforms. And for us, I compare it to dating. It's a lot like dating. So you basically keep dating throughout your developer life, and what you do is that you really go after what you seek, and what we sought here through VR was, new platform, can we make a difference? If we could answer that question and say, hey, is there something that we want to bring to this platform, we would do it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it.
Fantastic.
What the hell is that?
Oh, space magic.
Oh my God.
Oh, fuck.
The anomaly is changing. What the hell? Jack, are you seeing? Oh, shit!
Back online.
Incoming, Jack! Cut the panel!
Olivia, everything is going to be fine.
Station home compromised.
That's it! Got it!
Captain Rhodes.
Great!
So Nathan, I've lived this story with you guys and seen kind of the focus tests that have happened and seen the ways different people approach it and have got to see it. What was it like trying to put this new content forward to the audience, and how did you learn what was the right or wrong way to do things?
Yeah, so that was a really big challenge for us, working in such a new medium. And I think one thing that really illustrates that really well was like the little clip you saw of what we call the live trap moment. So that moment's like a huge spectacle. So it pretty much had all disciplines like working really hard to kind of fire on all cylinders to bring that together. And one thing that really happened from the very first focus test is it made a lot of people on the team really unsettled. They kind of freaked out seeing how users were experiencing the game. So people would get really concerned because they'd see a focus tester and they'd say, like, this person just turned around and just booked it away from all the spectacle. We slaved away so hard on these like massive effect sequences and these nuanced facial performances. They just missed that entirely. Or this other focus tester might kind of fixate on the panel right next to live and is kind of fumbling with the cutter tool. And in the moment kind of misses a lot of the nuance that's going on in the background. And so people were concerned that those were failure cases. And they would suggest things like, oh, maybe we can fix up the camera position or teleport the player so they're really experiencing all this detail that we put into the game. And that really spoke to kind of our background in coming from more traditional 2D games where there's so much emphasis on what you're seeing in this display. And so one way we really kind of changed our approach on the project was kind of getting a little more into kind of the emotional state and kind of psychology of players experiencing the game. So the same person that kind of just split immediately and ran like completely 180 from all this destruction, we would talk to them afterwards and kind of get insight into what they're going through. And they would describe, I completely panicked. I was terrified. I thought I was going to die. I was seeking refuge in kind of like all the girders of the station. And we're like, oh, that's awesome. That's exactly what we were trying to achieve with that sequence. Or like another person that was kind of fumbling with the panel around live and seemed to be having trouble with the cutter tool. She would describe, I was terrified for my friend. I thought my friend was going to die. I kind of botched the cutter mechanic. I had this lurching, sinking sensation in my stomach. I thought my friend was going to perish. And we're like, oh, that's kind of darker than we thought, but that's also awesome. That's really conveying the emotional depth of that sequence. And so that was something that we really tried to use a little more kind of analytical approach to kind of a subjective process and use that to kind of guide how we develop the game.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, man.
You go.
Yeah, I would say that what you touched on is really interesting. Like educating our team, like we're so fixated on presentation and dollars on screen that educating them that player agency and them feeling the right emotional response to the stimuli we were giving them was actually the success state for VR. We would actually kind of worry about people who would in that moment stop cutting and go, boy, that's really pretty, that's really expensive, look at all that shit they're throwing on screen. For us, it's like, no, as long as they knew there was imminent danger and they were acting appropriately as if they were really in that problem, then it was a win. And it was really hard to swallow that, to understand that that's actually what's really magical about VR. So I'm sure some of you come from teams where that school of thinking is pretty much most of what all of your employees are gonna know, and it's something that they have to go on that journey with you to understand that, and you have to actually help them to really get that that's what's powerful about VR.
Dana, can you talk about that image up on the right?
Oh, yeah. So to Nathan's point, we do a ton of focus testing. Actually, a lot of our major milestones for the game are scheduled around this idea of build a sequence, play test it, see if it works, see if people are getting it, tear it apart, redo it again. And we would have like these diagrams here to figure out like, let's just do a pass on density of stuff that people can manipulate or the POIs in the game that people can talk about and figure out, is there too much? Are they completely distracted? Is anybody even going into one of these chambers and fiddling around with stuff or finding some of the backstory elements? And we would meticulously take notes like, yep, they touched 3 things in this room. This person touched 5. This person didn't care and left all of it alone. So that we could figure out, how do we crunch what is really very subjective? Like each person's experience is going to be as unique to them as their own lives. And as a team, figure out what is something that we could concretely take away from that and figure out what's a positive next step to do with that, or should we just leave it alone? Is it working? And then some of that you see is just like data that turned into what we call like time graphs. Essentially see like, it looks like everybody's kind of playing this section about the same. Nobody's getting kind of a huge spike in time where they're stuck or they got lost. So we would just try to figure out, are we on the right track?
Yeah, so the really challenging thing, at least for our team, was a lot of us have been playing games for 20 to 30 years, right, in a 2D medium. And so when you're looking at VR, it was, at least at the time, it was like, at most, we saw it for 2 months, right, because we were all very new to the experience. So we didn't have a lot of built up like pedigree and past experiences with other games to really have as an example. So there was a lot of subjectivity to the whole process. Everyone thought everything was a great idea, and so the only real way to hash that out was, try something and really apply the scientific method to it. So you have a theory: is this going to be fun or not? Is this going to get the emotional response that we want? And then you prove that through focus testing to make sure that you get the outcome that you're desiring.
If I can add on one more thing, David, an important part of kind of gluing all of what they just talked about together to successful focus testing was having the whole team involved in it. So it's something that it's not like, oh, this is design's job, they're going to run the focus test, they're going to do the analytics, they're going to talk about what to improve afterwards. We would have a full kind of interdisciplinary group that would see hands-on not only what different players were doing, but then get a chance to talk to them afterwards and sort of understand what they were going through in that moment.
So focus testing is something we do traditionally on any type of game or product. Was it different for VR than you traditionally found it in some of your other games?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say more so than not, we really would go, okay, we have an idea for something, but we're not really sure what the kind of final end goal is going to be in terms of the details. And so we'd try to get a really rough representation of, say, like a mission together, see somebody play it, figure out what are the things they get and don't get, and then kind of really apply more emphasis towards that. I mean, I guess that is pretty typical, but I think what we learned from it was just things like dialogue you have to iterate on them so much because everybody hears things differently. Everybody latches onto different things at different times. And just like in our own worlds, I use the cell phone example. Like people in this room right now are probably like looking at their cell phones. And so you may hear what I'm saying right now because I said that, but maybe you missed what I said a second ago. That happens to people in VR. And we're trying to make a game that's both narrative and also kind of like two characters solving problems together. They're going to tune in and out as they please. And so through focus testing, we were able to tell, like, are we just throwing too much at the player right now? Like, can they actually digest all of this or not? Or subtle things like, hey, we're writing stuff that, it's just too long.
And I think, to your point, how things are different. Sometimes, I think traditionally, even if we look at the games that we've done in the past, there's more of a singular goal. What you mentioned before, like, when we talked about that sequence that we just showed, there's more of a singular goal that you're trying to focus test for. You're looking at something that basically has a target, and you're trying to get the players through that target in traditionally in what we did. Here, we were finding that the target was kind of always a little moving, and you have to be comfortable with the fact that this might be what you want to hit, but all of this is okay. And in VR, it matters that much more, that you have to be okay, that it's a bigger breadth of things that are going to be okay.
Yeah, and to riff on that a little bit, you're going to want to be comfortable with the player not seeing everything there. Yeah. That's a really important thing. It's a hard thing for people to see. Like, that whole sequence, you could conceptually look down the entire time, looking at nothing but the cutting plate, panicking, and we saw that, and we got the emotional response that we're looking from people, and it broke everyone's heart, all the effort that they put into the surrounding. But the reality is that surrounding needs to be there, right? That whole effort needs to be done in order to get a complete package. And so every different person is going to get a different slice of that complete package, so it needs to be wholly fleshed out. And
kind of to add on to that, we'd also look at other ways of kind of enhancing that. So for the person that is maybe not looking at the main spectacle, we would add like audio experience of like if they're fleeing from the area, you'd get spatial audio of like things kind of pinging off their helmet and things whizzing by. So it's like they're there, it's contributing to the presence, they're still getting that emotional response regardless of what they do.
So normally when we look at focus tests, it's usually data, right? We're looking at numbers, we're looking at graphs, we're looking at percentage charts like you have up here too. How much did you actually have to do interviews and actually talk to someone about how they felt? Because we really don't do that normally in traditional gaming.
Yeah, that's actually something we learned the hard way. I'd say out of necessity, at one point we were testing so much of the game and our experience is pretty large for VR, I'd say. And it became obvious that in order to just churn through and get people through the experience, we had to start not having collective kind of group Q&A sessions where we would traditionally bring them all in and ask them a series of questions and go around and hear what everybody kind of felt or thought about certain topics. And we would start assigning an individual to actually go with each of the testers, and when they were done with the section, sit down with them for like 10 minutes, ask them a bunch of questions, and see what they wanted to tell us. And we found a lot was really interesting about that. They were very open. They were a lot more open than if they would be in a group setting. They would offer you information that you may not ask, in that same setting, and you were able to kind of get a deeper dive into every different person's, feelings a lot more than you would on paper. And unfortunately, it was something that we didn't start doing until very late in the process. So I would highly recommend trying to find a way to do that earlier, because I think that data mining opportunity, like, you don't get tons of them over the course of development, and if you can make any of those richer, you're better off.
You guys are established developers. What was it like for the team to transition into kind of VR?
Well, who wants to start on that one?
Oh my God, yeah. I think we all have a lot to say about it. I think, I want to start by saying, when we started, the talk and David asked me about why we did this, it was the challenge, right? But the thing about the challenge of actually working on something like this is the uncertainty. And more than ever before, I think that we saw very early on that everything was uncertain. Unfortunately, for things being uncertain, I think you guys have all, one way or the other, gone through it with your developments. It's the doubt that it creates. It's one thing to say, I don't know something. It's another thing for that doubt to basically, permeate through the team, where everybody kind of goes like, wait, do they know what they're doing? Or do these guys know what they're doing? And it's a tough thing to basically go, hey, we're going to answer this together, but you kind of got to push forward and believe. And it is a very kind of long process for certain groups basically to go like, oh, you know what? Things are not going to be the same, for me on this project than it was on the other one. But all of that doubt is good. That's kind of ultimately what I would say about it, is that you should not be afraid of it. And actually, even if the team actually doubts it, they will all find kind of the nugget to hold on to. And that's kind of what happened with us.
Yeah, the really challenging thing was no one likes to do something they're not good at, right? And so no one knew if they were going to be good at this medium. No one knew what this was, what made something compelling, because there wasn't really anything there. But early on, we actually did get some demos in that really helped a lot to see what other people were doing. Getting people in VR as fast as possible is probably the easiest way to convince them, because you're not going to convince them through a YouTube video or something like that, or even reading reviews or anything. It's getting them in there, seeing presence, and getting them sold on the whole process.
Very cool. Let's move on. One quick note, we're not going to talk too much about the hands today, because Jake Copenhagen, who's actually from Already at Dawn, did a fantastic speech. Oh, he's right there. Wave, Jake.
Hey, Jake.
He did a fantastic talk at GDC where he went really deep, kind of on the hands and the IK around the hands on there. So highly recommend anybody go check that out. It's available online, and that's just going to save us a little bit more time today. So Dana, tell me about your comfort level and what your ability is to understand VR.
Okay, so I think going into VR, I didn't really understand much about comfort and simulation sickness and the like, and I think just as a person, I'm like, I'm probably good. And so I think one of the guys I work with brought in his DK1 for the first time, and I think it was the Tuscan Villa, I believe is the name of one of the demos in there, and I was really excited. I put it on, and probably after a couple of minutes, I was like, something feels really strange, and I had to take it off. And he's like, you want to play it tomorrow? I'm like, no, I'm okay. I didn't really understand that experience, but I was like, okay, maybe it's just a little overwhelming VR, and I don't get it yet. So then the DK2s, I believe we got those when we started working on the project with Oculus. And I think the same demo was in there, as well as somebody downloaded a Half-Life 2 VR mod. And again, I was very enthusiastic and excited, and after about 20 or 30 minutes, I started to feel outright sick. And I didn't understand why, and I was kind of disheartened. I thought to myself, oh man, VR is bad. That's simple.
And that was the end of it.
That's pretty much, I was like, call David.
After we signed, right?
Call Jason and David back, we're out. No, so I took it upon myself, I took it upon myself to figure out like, what was it that I was experiencing? What was this problem that I was encountering that was making me feel sick? So I did a lot of reading. There was a lot of people, obviously, who've been exploring VR for a long time, and this notion of simulator sickness I kept on kind of hearing about, tried to describe, the kind of phenomena of when your eye, ear, doesn't kind of sense the same things, and your brain interprets that as something that it's like, help, you should stop what you're doing. And so I realized it's because these things were using conventional methods of getting around, like analog stick video game movement, to try to tell me that I'm moving in a way that my body physiologically does not agree with. So long story short, I said, well, if we're signing up to make an exploration game, holy crap, we have to get around. What are we going to do? And in previous games, we talked about doing interesting things on our game pads with using like, the triggers for hands. And I just said, let's try to do something, with moving with our hands, because we are not moving with our legs, and maybe, it'll work. And we just did some quick prototypes.
And this is pre-touch.
This is pre-touch, correct. We didn't even know there was going to be a thing called touch. So we had the Xbox controller that the headsets came with, and we were attempting to prototype a movement system based on the idea of being in 0G and using your hand. So that video that I think we just played, and I think the one before that showed some really rudimentary like spheres that would just kind of latch onto things, and we were crawling in what seemed like a pretty awesome way back then. But the thing that we noticed was we felt fine. We probably shouldn't feel fine because it still wasn't really natural, but I think it was enough for us to go, there's something here.
And let's talk about the body, because one day there was no body. This is coming from the Oculus side. One day there was no body, and then a milestone dropped, and there was a body.
Yeah.
I understand that was quite a conversation internally, too.
Yeah, so I guess this is my moment to look like an idiot.
It's okay.
I was very, 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 very against having a body in the game. Partly because I have really weird, like if my shoulders don't line up, my elbows don't line up, it just gets me out of the presence immediately. And then the other thing is I wasn't 100% convinced it was technologically possible, given the information that we had available. You have a head sample point and 2 hand sample points. The player can turn any way, 360 degrees, can move physically. There's a lot of different variables there that just couldn't be tracked. But these two, after much debate, probably arguing, yelling, name calling.
Some swearing, probably.
Yeah, some swearing. It was not pretty.
Lots of swearing.
We got back to agreeing on it, that we would at least try the thing. And that was actually my worst fear, was to try it, because I was worried we would get so close, but not quite there. Everyone hits these technological points where you can get to like 80%, 90% in like a week, but it takes like 5 years to develop out that rest of the 10%. And I was convinced this is what it was. I wasn't entirely wrong. It took a lot of work, but the reality though is we got an early drop. I think we spent 2 to 3 weeks working on a prototype for the body and arms. First it was the arms, and the body came later. And that, once we got in there, and even me, I was probably the biggest detractor, went, okay, this isn't horrible, which I guess was the highest praise I was willing to give at the time. I was like, okay, yeah, we should move forward with this and try to really flesh out the tech there.
Awesome. Root, can you talk a little bit about why the player plays as Jack instead of as a human?
Yeah, there were multiple reasons for that. I think it came from every department almost. There was I think decisions actually that came from design, from story, from art, from every single angle. But most importantly was we talk about presence. This is about presence as locomotion, but presence meant that you were no longer playing an avatar. You were the avatar. And how do you basically put every single one of us basically in a place where we are the avatar and we all feel comfortable being the avatar? And funnily enough, it's where the natural notion of saying like, I should play a human goes out the door. Because if you should play a human and your avatar is going to be you and you're going to live through that avatar in VR, well, if I'm a woman playing a man, if I'm a man playing a woman, if I'm a child playing, it all kind of has these permutations where you kind of go like, where is the separation, where's the dissonance going to happen? And one of the early kind of decisions to go that route was also, look, if we can detach and turn the tables around and make you something that isn't almost an empty shell. It's a shell that it represents you, and you can actually become something that, again, is not a barrier, that the voice is not going to become a barrier, the emotions are not going to become a barrier. That would give you presence. That would give you the side of VR that is so amazing that we heard today at the keynote being talked about. It's like immersion. If you want immersion, you have to break down the barriers of what makes you stop feeling like you're there. And the avatar was really the very first kind of barrier we had to cross, and that's why Jack was born.
Yeah, I was going to say, even piggybacking off of the body conversation, like one of the reasons we had those arguments was like some of us were very convinced that if we looked down and didn't see some representation of our body, we wouldn't, like for what we were targeting in terms of like really quadrupling down on presence, that a lot of us would not feel present in this space adventure with another character who we can fully see, and we're gonna make her believable. We believe we can do that, but we were concerned about the fact that if we don't look equally as believable, then we would just shatter, all sense of presence. And at one point we were even talking about like the psychology of being inside of a body that is not your own. And well, what if we're a human who's like remote piloting a drone avatar that looks robotic, so you still know you're human, but the body looks metal, so you don't worry about it not looking like you. Like those kind of things are actually, they seem silly to talk about, but we factored in a lot of different kind of takes to understand what we might need to do. And we're not right on all that stuff. It took a lot of conversations and trial and error, but I think we could be completely honest that there are still people who play this game and say, it's weird to me. And there's going to be that, there's going to be a percentage of people who are, no matter what you do, probably going to be sensitive to something you've done. But we were trying to, talk about a percentages game. We were trying to figure out what was the best that we could do to capture the most, amount of users.
Can you talk about the anatomy of the robot? I'm going to use Jack itself, Nathan, because that's fascinating.
So kind of along the lines of Ru was saying, our goal with the character was making a character that anyone could play as, and it's not me, but it's not anyone else either. It doesn't have the baggage of looking like a specific human. So kind of regardless of gender, body type, whatever, everyone kind of came in from the same place with the robot. So we really tried to approach the character design from that standpoint as well. So some things we really incorporated was strong use of negative space. So your hands, obviously that's one of the most important things in VR. And so you'll see a lot of air and gaps between the fingers, between the wrists, the forearm. So that was sort of a constant reminder to people that, hey, you're not a dude in the suit, you're this AI character. And then we kind of play that up with even the interactions with the physical body. So your interactions in terms of using your tools or actually touching your own body, it's sort of like role-playing the fantasy of being this robot. And over time, people actually get accustomed to the body as their own in the game. So that's also something we kind of took into account with kind of the silhouette of the character. So we tried to incorporate a design that was sort of agnostic of gender. So you'll see sort of a mix of kind of silhouette and design language where hopefully you guys can see it, but like on the hips, like the cushioning and kind of the proportions of where it kind of flares out, or the sternum that kind of gives you a little more volume in the chest without specifically referencing a gender or another. Those were kind of tricks we used to try to make the character kind of equally relatable to anyone that kind of steps inside it.
You mentioned the interactions on the wrists, and they actually are in the game as something that you touch and is tactile. Garret, can you talk a bit about, even the conversation UI and the ARM computer and just kind of the evolution of that from where we were at the very beginning to kind of what we ended up with at the end?
Yeah, so at the very beginning of the project, you had a face-locked menu that everywhere you looked at something, you would flick through options to talk to it. And what we ended up with was
controller.
Yeah, you would use a controller, not unlike other kind of narrative-driven games. And then we ended up with essentially like a tablet that you would go and flick through and do options there. It was really important to get very tactile kind of response to things. And so that was a really kind of important thing. And a lot of that actually was spawned from just a lot of just experimentation within the studio. So people just trying things and getting in there and going, I don't believe this is working, so we're going to try something else. We're going to try this different method to do it, and trying to convince the rest of us that we're right or wrong.
Yeah, that was a really hard one because we have a game, it's about narrative, it's about characters, and we have all of this fidelity of movement, interactivity, right? That's kind of physical based, but one of the things we take for granted, maybe hopefully we don't take for granted, is the ability to communicate with one another is probably one of our most powerful tools. And so here we have our character in a world where I can't talk to the other character. That seems weird. So we're like, well, we know he needs to have a voice, but we don't have a one-to-one way other than the microphone on the headset doing all the complex like Alexa work to go, okay, whatever the player says, she's going to hear it and respond to it naturally, so we couldn't do that. And so what he was just describing about this face-locked interface and using the controllers, it's a very abstract way of trying to teach the player to use their voice. Robbie, one of our designers, and I one day sat down to talk about other methods for that, and we started talking about tablets and cell phones, things that all of you are very familiar with, and how we're very accustomed to just whipping it out of our pockets or wherever it might be, holding it at this length of arm that we were very comfortable reading, tapping a few things, putting it away. And that kind of became, kind of the idea behind, well, if we just need to talk, we get a little prompt, a little buzz on the controller, just like your phone vibrating. You pull it out, you make a choice of what you want to say, you make it go away. That muscle memory of where the text needs to be comfortable to read is easy for us to kind of remember. And everybody will be different about where they put that or where they want that interface to be. It's decisions like that, if you guys think about those things, where to pull from real life. We had a lot of conversations at the keynote about how trying to mirror or get to real life, well, there's a lot of stuff that you can steal from real life that are very applicable to VR.
Morning, sunshine. And how are we feeling today? Right back at you, pal. Did you throw that on purpose?
My face is not a handle, Jack.
Shit! This is really not my day.
Let's get started on that checklist.
You sure? There's no rush. It is our last week, after all.
Yes, I'm sure. We should try to maintain our schedule.
Suit yourself. All work and no play.
What was that?
Nothing.
So one of the fun things for me on the inside was that we actually used RoboVoice for all of the lines for maybe 3/4 of the way through the project. There were some other things going on with our actors and unions. Delays and things.
That's a whole nother postmortem.
You want to go there? No, I don't at all. Right. But one of the fantastic things for me is when the actual voice and the performance got dropped in, both the VO and the animation. And I remember, all the tech stuff, right? The locomotion model, maybe we were just used to it by then, but yeah. The fascinating thing for me was I think people are really just going to appreciate Jack and Liv and just kind of the relationship they have. So can you guys tell us a little bit about the relationship and how that even evolved over the development time? Dana?
You want to start?
Well, I mean, you coined it, the Groundhog Day thing, so
I'll let you
start with that.
No, I think early on, at least we had some actual acting of the two main characters in the beginning to start making some of our assumptions based on some focus tests, but we would ask questions in these we had a questionnaire that every player would take, and we would ask them questions like, what do you think of Olivia Rhodes? Who do you think she is? Do you like her? How do you feel about yourself? Just, feeling people's impressions of these characters out so we could kind of get some baseline for how we're doing or what we want to change about them. And people would say things like, she's bossy, I hate her, she makes me feel like a piece of crap robot, I feel like a slave robot, The worst possible things, to hear, but we needed to hear them and understand why. And so I kind of was talking to Ruth, I said, developing the characters and the narrative sequences for the game was a little bit like Groundhog Day, the movie, in that, Bill Murray's continuing to try to make all the right choices with Andie MacDowell's character so that hopefully she'll fall in love with him. We were crafting this relationship using the same method, which is okay, don't have her say this to Jack, don't have Jack say that, check, 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 make the next version, start again, test it, hoping for a different result, a better result. So yeah, sometimes it was just kind of crazy to have people get together to see the same 5-minute sequence of the game, to take feverish notes, and then read everything, that people said about it, to try to come away with little micro changes. We learned things like instead of Liv telling Jack to do something, having her suggest what the situation is and having Jack say, I think we should do this next. And oh, they feel like a team now. She's not bossing you around. You feel somewhat her equal. Little things like that matter. How we talk to each other, we all know kind of matters, I hope. So in VR, it's the same thing. If you want people to feel engaged with these characters or characters you might be building, make sure that the one they're playing is very relevant and is part of everything that is going on, and don't make them kind of feel like the low man on the totem pole, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things actually about building characters in VR, again, breaking that barrier from a window, a 2D screen, to actually being immersed in there, is also how different language, voice, am I gonna like myself? Am I gonna like myself is very different when you play an avatar, and then you are the avatar. And that's a very different thing, play and being. And building those characters, we had to go through that motion too. It's okay, we build Jack. Am I gonna like Jack? Am I going to like being Jack? What kind of language do I use? What's the extent of my language? Do I sound too smart? Am I not smart enough? It's tough because it's a robot and he's all-knowing. So, imagine if he had been an encyclopedia. I'm pretty sure that everybody would have just gone I don't want to play this game. But you need to basically walk that line to try and figure out, all right, where do we go with this? And the last piece of the puzzle, I think, between all the characters, really like, we write what we do. As Dana said, we go through iterations of basically going like, yeah, I know I got it right this time. You go again and you kind of get a focus test and you're like, oh, I was so wrong. And then you go again. And I was like, I was kind of right. And you keep going like that. And that last piece was really, getting the voices in. So we had Troy Baker, Alice Coulthard. You saw Alice up there, basically with the face markers, who was Liv. There was something really great that went there in finding not only what Nathan talked about before on the aesthetic side, what it feels like to be you, what it feels like to be Jack, but what does it feel to sound like him, like Jack? And Troy, at the very beginning, I called it 50 Shades of Troy, because when you get Troy Baker, if any of you have ever met, seen, heard, worked with him, you get him in a booth, and then you end up with your first session with about 50 different characters, because he just goes on and on and on. He's like one of the most versatile people there. But it was really like this kind of like, okay, is Jack going to be kind of stern? Is he going to be friendly? Is it going to be a little angry? When is he showing too much emotion? One of the things about VR, and it's tough right now, but I'm sure we're going to break those boundaries too in the end, was actually trying to figure out, if I am the player, if I'm going to say something, am I going to feel like what is being said? And if I'm Troy, like, reading this and something happens, in the game, some heightened moments happen. And Troy literally got like really excited and he said something like really, like as a human being, he sounded like a little bit more like a human being. And Troy himself checked himself and just said, dude, I'm way too excited about this. And it's weird because you would want that in a traditional game, but you can't have that when you're the avatar, because you play that, and we had sequences like that where we would play, Troy would say something over the top, and the first reaction from focus testers and actually ourselves would just be like, I so don't feel like him. And that's a very, very hard kind of balance to have. And over time, we ended up by basically dialing so that we started using Alice and Liv, the human being, who's actually the NPC, who's the AI in the game in so many ways. We started using her to become emotion in the game and not you as the character, which is a very different way of actually approaching writing, games, and basically storytelling.
Can you talk a little bit about the cast, actually, because I want to get to, because an interesting thing for me was Hera and Apollo. I mean, maybe it's a little spoilery, but you're here. Talk to me a bit about how Hera came to be and how Apollo came to be, and just why the story kind of went down that arc.
Sure. I mean, it made sense to kind of like, we saw the sci-fi where there's a ship computer, right? I mean, I think we're all familiar with most of those tropes. So it made sense if, Olivia's on this station, not only does she have maybe some physical robot companions, but maybe there's like an all-seeing kind of mother or main computer thing to talk to. So that seemed like a good fit. And then we realized somewhere really early on that we have to make tutorials for this game. And we have to teach the player how to do all these complex things, how to activate tools, how to, endless number of things. And how are we going to do that? And that seemed like a really bad idea to have Liv talk to you in a way that was very instructional. Because one, you're not going to like her after she tells you what to do for the 100th time when she's like, Jack, press the button, Jack, press the button. You're like, I know, press the button. So not only that, the writers also really did not like writing, stereo manuals, how to, operate a VCR type of stuff. So the concessions seemed to make sense to go like, okay, if there's a dumber computer on board the ship, maybe it's okay for it to tell you how to do all these things, and we'll just frame it as like a diagnostic calibration module. And it was like, yeah, that's good. We'll do that. And so then Hera became like an integral part to tutorializing, and then on top of that, there's spoilers, but somewhere in the game she becomes a character that Jack kind of relies on when something happens.
One piece about that that's extremely important, I think the other side of it, so there was the game mechanic and gameplay side of actually having Hera and the other character, which you already said is Apollo. But the other side of it also is the same thing that we did with Liv. Hera became actually a measure of how we could get Jack to be more human. If Hera was on one end of being emotionless and a little bit more robotic, it made Jack feel a little bit more human. And that was 1 degree right there. And then Liv was the human degree that was actually all the way at the other end. I would tell you if there's one takeaway to take from this, especially again in the immersion of being inside VR, is to use little markers around the game, whether it's voices or anything like that, to measure yourself against. Having Hera And having Liv meant that you could actually define Jack. It's one of the greatest ways basically to build a character.
And the Series 8s too. We had, like you
Series
see in the
8.
backdrop there, I think it's on the far left, there's that other robot in the backdrop. Those are kind of the labor units in our game, and they're like older models that Jack has evolved from, and they're scattered all over the mining facility, and you encounter them, you can ask them, from time to time, some kind of small things to kind of get hints about stuff, but overall, they behave much more primitive than you are, and so there's immediately things around the universe that when you encounter them, you feel better about yourself. You're like, oh, right, that's an old model. I'm way cooler than this guy. So little things like that are psychologically also beneficial for the player.
Space Frisbee. Oh, bad throw. Oh! Just keep punching each other in different ways until you get some good footage.
Friendly. Friendly. Make it.
Beautiful.
Hello. Hi, Synchro. How's it going? Hello.
Hello.
Hey, JS. How's it going? Hello. Yes, I can hear you.
Wow.
If you keep your hands out in front of you, like Superman, you'll be able to see where you're going more easily. Nice.
Like a bowling ball kind of?
Kinda. Nice. Yeah, that works. Did you teach a lot of people?
Thanks.
There you go. Now punch in the face. Nice. If we punch you, we get stunned.
That's scary. This is how you need to do, bro. Okay? Like that. Okay, now do that. Do that.
Can't do it. Oh wow, you can do the both. Oh, you got the same.
Yeah, see, we're hamburger helpers. We're here to help new people.
Oh, I'm joining.
Oh, you are? Have fun.
So, let's talk about how Echoarena came to be. Because it wasn't the plan originally.
You should know that.
We could have a whole talk about just that.
And you're saying?
Okay, so yeah, I think my favorite story about this was it's OC2, and a bunch of us from Ready at Dawn came up to the show, and one of the demos that was on display was Toybox. And you could reserve your time for it. Oh, cool. And I went and I stood in line, and then I got into the demo, and I was just completely blown away by the fact that there's another person being an avatar, a blue floaty head with hands, and we're having this real connection, conversation, and playing with toys in this virtual space. And I felt it was probably the most compelling multiplayer experience, even though it wasn't like a game really. It was just an experience that I'd probably ever had in my whole life. And that day, I told everybody that after I saw it, I was like, this is the killer app for VR. I know they were saying at the keynote there's not. Secretly, Toybox is the killer app, tell everybody. Just because I think it proves what is so impressive about the platform that you can't do anywhere else. And so to the point where that day, I reserved, I think, 5 more demos to go back in there to just talk to people. I'd say, hey, don't show me the demo. I've done the demo 3 times already. I just want to talk to you. I want to see mannerisms. I want to have a conversation. I just want to meet somebody now, which probably creeped out a bunch of the brand ambassadors. But I just really needed to digest what it was that was going on. And then we all kind of came away having conversations about how magical that was, and oh man, wouldn't it be cool if in our world, in the 0G environment, we could hang out with each other and do something or play a game. And so we tried it.
Yeah. So in between major milestones, we gave ourselves an opportunity to do an internal game jam with the studio. And so on that game jam, there was a lot of different stuff that went out there, and anecdotally, that's how that crazy rocket thing made it into the game, and a bunch of other interactions with the Fury modules. But the really cool one was multiplayer was spawned very early on, and I remember Dave and Jake came up and they said, "Hey, I got to show you something cool." And this was only a couple hours after they started. And you go into this shared empty room essentially, and we were all represented by 3 spheres, 2 little spheres for the hands and a big sphere for the head, and that was all that we had replicated. And we were just talking to each other, and it was weird how emotive that was. Like you could actually I could tell them apart just by how they were moving, because I've seen them in real life doing that. But it was very strange, and it was also like we have to do this. Like this is something that we can't not do now, right? And then so that spun into game mode testing and a bunch of other stuff that these guys can touch on. But it kind of just. It became like a force that couldn't be stopped because of the momentum behind it was so strong from that initial get-go.
And I mean, one piece of it also, and we got to give props to Oculus, to David, and to Jason and all that, because it takes it takes mentality. It takes a certain way of thinking about.
It takes a developer.
Thank you. We love this guy. No, but really, it does take a certain type of mentality, and I think that's the great thing about Oculus as well. I think that drive to actually the social aspect of everything, that drive to be social in what we do in VR, about connecting with the world, about being immersed and all that, was a big part of why multiplayer happened. You asked how it happened. It happened with the game jam, but it also happened because we all got together on a demo one day. We broke a few things inside our office as well during the demo, which, by the way, if you guys have done that while playing Echo Arena, we're so sorry. We really are. All of us are very sorry about that. But yeah, the pluses were we had a movement model going for it, and we had a partner that actually had that kind of same mindset. It wasn't the goal, but it truly became like a goal that we were all passionate about afterwards.
Nathan, you want to talk about the open beta? Because for me, that was a lot of fun, just booting it up, and everyone hit it into play. And I ended up just standing in the lobby the whole time. Yeah. And I would go away and I'd come back and the same people would be in the same lobby and they hadn't moved at all. So it was, what are your thoughts on that?
The lobby was definitely like a really magical part of the experience. And that the kernel of that kind of started almost a year before we even had a lobby. Because we were showing at OC3 and we had a very practical problem. We had to get people in and out of a multiplayer experience cold in like 15 minutes or something like that.
You guys gave us 20 at the end.
Okay, 20.
14.
And it's like new locomotion model, new game, and it's a multiplayer zero gravity team sport, and you want to have a full match. And so we kept kind of reworking tutorials, like how can we make that fit in time, and it just didn't. And so kind of tying into the lobby, what we came to call the Captain Mars effect, we had Captain Mars and Captain Kyle, like two of our devs, who basically in the kind of ready base for each team would take people through the experience. And so it was almost like that moment as a kid where you go into laser tag and they're kind of showing you how to use it and you're already getting kind of psyched up and excited. And the social aspect of that was so magical. Not only did they learn the game faster, but they had fun learning it. So the point, like the doors open, the match starts, and they're like, wait, that wasn't the game? There's more? And so we saw that kind of early on, and so that's why we realized right away we need to have like a social space and a lobby. And so when open beta came around, it was awesome seeing that same phenomenon just naturally translate to the community. So people were hanging out in the lobby, they were helping each other out. You saw like a kind of an excerpt of one of our awesome players, Sakura.
Is she here? I think she's here.
Right there.
Hello.
Nice.
That was pretty
Very nice. It's really good.
Creepy.
And just that mentality added so much more to the game than we could have expected, where maintaining kind of a positive, healthy community and welcoming new players to this really complex experience, it's like the collective community kind of took initiative for that. And what was really awesome is it kind of manifested into newer players too. So it's like someone would come to her like hamburger helper day and she would she or other people joining in would take them through the experience and be really nice and open to them. And then a couple weeks later, they're kind of up and coming experienced players. They're now looking forward to doing the same thing to other people. So that was just something awesome and unexpected, and we really appreciate.
David, could you tell me what that is?
I don't know. Dana, we've actually seen this game before. So we're running short on time. I want to make sure we wrap up on schedule. And just so again, a reminder, we're not doing Q&A. We're going to head over and actually see the quarterfinals are starting for the VR Challenger League. So the top 8 players in North America for Echo Arena are actually competing here today. I think the total cash prize for first place is $10,000, and that is the evening entertainment tonight. So please, if you want to see some of the best high-level play of Echo Arena, we'll be over there for Q&A, and that will also be the show for tonight. So in the last minute that we have, I want to talk about, Echo combat. One of the things we hear a lot is, why can't I have guns? And, if this is Ender's Game, why am I not freezing people? But I'm curious to hear about how we ended up at Echo Arena from when we actually had Capture the Flag and some of those other arena modes. So let's spend some time talking about that.
All right. So yeah, the game jam that we had that would, eventually yield Echo Arena had a few other types of modes, like an assault mode, a Capture the Flag mode, some straight up deathmatch modes, and I think from those initial prototypes, the big takeaway was what was magical about VR was the social part of it. So we said, let's make something that's first and foremost social, cooperative, so people are getting together, helping each other, formulating a really strong and friendly community in a safe place. So let's emphasize that, and then competitive second. It's competitive is something like, cool, it'll give them a reason to get better, it'll give them motivation to come back, to continue playing, to kind of always be trying to edge out another team, another group, but in a really good sportsman-like way. So there was just so much we had to learn just to achieve that, that we said, let's tackle something a little bit simpler first, where we don't compromise any of those goals, where we're not worried about kind of the effect of when you start to have ranged weapons, a lot of the gameplay will start to take place at ranged distances. And a lot of that was kind of at odds with our initial goals of getting people up close and personal, so that person that you're piggybacking off, we're about to punch, every little bit of the nuanced motion that they're having, you read that as another person, and you're experiencing, again, that magic of presence in multiplayer. So we said, this is something really juicy to explore next. Let's learn a lot of the hard stuff and make sure that we figured out a good, strong core of our online component, and then let's figure out what we do with that afterwards, because we know that there's something there that a lot of people are asking for.
Awesome. So we'll be releasing more news about Echo Combat in the upcoming months into 2018. Wanted to thank everybody for coming here. Want to thank Rue, Dana, Garrett, Nathan for joining us today. Thank you all again. Please join us over in the demo hall and watch some great game. Thanks again.